I'm Todd Crawford,
And I'm Eric Zavinski.
and we are too cool for the comic shop. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about the 4 mainline entries in the Crash Bandicoot series. It was started on the PlayStation 1 by Naughty Dog.
Yes, and then continued with Toys for Bob's entry, Crash Bandicoot 4. It's About Time, which is a very recent PlayStation 4 release. Just came out this year.
Yep, and I should add that we are not going to be discussing Crash. I don't even remember what the game's called. I have this weird... What's it called? The Baron.
Well, there's a lot of other Crash games.
You know what I'm talking about, though, with you remember something being different than it was in the past. I always thought it was CTR Crash Team Racing for the first one. But
oh, right. Yeah, the racing series.
That one was made by Naughty Dog, and that was supposed to end those characters, at least for Naughty Dog.
Right, and they remade that game as well, I believe.
Yeah, and in that game, that one for the PlayStation was a very good game, but that's just not... We're sticking to the platformers, we're sticking to the trilogy and the most recent entry.
Yes, so Todd, you are the resident Bandicoot expert here. I'm a huge gamer and probably game more than you do, but for this particular series, this is kind of your stomping grounds. So why don't you go into your history?
Actually, Crash is one of the 2 or 3 first games I ever remember playing. I remember my dad bringing it home with the PlayStation. I think it was a demo for the second game, or it was just the second game, and I just remember playing it, and it's so weird because I was so young. It's hard for me to remember. The big thing I do remember, though, is that he was in the basement, and the living room at my old childhood house was up 2 flights of stairs in the basement because there was a landing when you walked in the door. And anytime I would do something, like if I'd spin and a penguin would fly off the screen, I would run downstairs and be like, Dad, I hit this button, and then a penguin flew all over the place. And then I was doing that, and then at one point my brother had taken the disc of the game out and broken it, which might have been the beginning of a very long sibling rivalry for us that lasted roughly a decade after that.
Yeah, you don't want to spin right into the disc. I bet Crash would break his own game.
Yeah. So and then
I got memory,
I got quite a few of the games as a kid. I loved them all. I'd say probably the third was my favorite as a kid. Second or third was my favorite, and I had the Game Boy games. They had some of those. There was one in which he and Spyro trade games or some weird shit, some fucking gimmick. And for me personally, when the PlayStation 2 came out, I had the option to pick out a game when I got it. And I got to choose between Pac-Man World 2 or Crash, whatever, Wrath of Cortex, I think it was called.
Yeah, I believe it was the Wrath of Cortex. That's actually the first Crash game that I played at a friend's house when I was a kid. So that was my first introduction to the series. Also, side note, Pac-Man World 2 is the best Pac-Man game. It's an incredible 3D platformer.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is I made the right choice because Pac-Man World 2 is awesome. And
yes, it is.
I don't know why I chose it. Something in my heart is like God was just like, Todd, I know you love Crash, but hear me out on this.
Yeah, you need a little Pac-Man in your life, young Todd.
Yeah, so that was the last game that I played in the Crash series, was Crash Bash, chronologically for the PlayStation at least. And that was like a Mario Party knockoff. And I didn't play the games until they came out for PlayStation 4 Remastered. Really, I played the second one a time or two in college, and then I just began to play it obsessively, just all the time. And my favorite things, beer and Bandicoots. Just, I can't drink anymore, I'm sober, but when I was drinking, I would just drink and play Crash and listen to music, turn the TV on mute and listen to music or a podcast, and it is just about the comfiest thing on earth.
Ooh, if I was drinking and playing these games, I might not be in great shape right now.
It is it's so great, especially because I love doing the time trials where if you die once, you're done. And it's great because you get like a little bit more confident, so you're willing to take that slide jump over the gap or whatever to skip a platform. and you're getting
That's
better and
true.
better, and then you peak, and then at some point you're like, what the hell? I should have made that jump. I made it all night. What?
Right.
And then you just can't do anything.
I feel that way. Quick background on my Crash history. I don't really have one. I was always interested in the character because I really liked all cartoon video game mascots growing up. I mean, I was a Nintendo kid and still am at heart. So I grew up on Mario, and something that is compared to Crash in a lot of ways is the Donkey Kong Country series. And I have perfected my skills at those games, at least the 5 mainline Donkey Kong games. So going to Crash was pretty familiar territory. There's definitely a style of Crash that was, wholly unique to it. But I just played all 4 games. So I played the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy in November, and I did like a day where I played the first game, and then a day where I played through like the second and the third game. And then I just played Crash 4, finished playing it less than 12 hours before recording this podcast right now. So I'm very fresh into the Crash fandom.
I was wondering why you had the casts on both of your arms.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, one thing I'm thankful for is that Crash 4 has a modern mode, and it's very beautiful because it doesn't make the game any easier, but it makes it less aggravating because most of my anger and frustration with the first 3 games is when you make it far into a level, but you die so much that you lose all your lives, and then you have to do the whole level over again. There's something about losing progress, especially in hard as nails platformers, that just makes me want to throw the controller out the window. But we'll get into the difficulties. So, I mean, that's part of the charm, and that's probably the reason why you still like play these games as an adult man.
Oh no, it's because I'm lonely.
Well, that too. That's the primary reason.
Yeah, that's the deep-seated psychological reason. Maybe I should say.
Right.
Yeah, so let's just take it from the top and start on Crash 1, which I think we could both agree is easily the hardest of the original trilogy.
Yes, I definitely agree with that statement. Starting out, the first world, not too bad. It's like, oh, this is breezy fun. It's not easy. You get your first couple run into the camera levels. You get a couple levels that are trickier, like the climb the like fort and beat up the natives, which is kind of a weird
Crash
situation.
He's an imperialist.
Yeah. So Neocortex is an imperialist, and he's going to try to create Crash to be a general in his army, which I don't know if we knew before Crash 4 specifically, but I guess we know that now.
I don't know. I'm gonna be real and say, like, I know that there's supposed to be some plot in these games, and who cares?
It's there to serve a purpose of comedy,
Pretty much,
to lighten up your mood after you make your fingers bleed, right? So
pretty much. Crash 4 definitely has the most well-defined story and the most, I don't want to say logical, because I don't even know what the plot is in the other 3 games, but
right.
It has the most emphasis.
They put effort into it in Crash 4, but we'll get to that later. Crash 1 really just throws you right in. Like the initial cutscene is like less than a minute long. Like jumps out the window and all right, now we're starting, basically.
And that is one thing I love about the first game is you're just thrown into it where it begins with him waking up on the beach after jumping out the window, and you just start, and it does feel like an adventure. One of my favorite things about this game is that the platforming, especially in the fortress levels, you get this sense of going somewhere where by the end of it, you're like, holy crap, that was a long distance that I just crossed vertically and horizontally to get to the end of this level. And I really appreciate that.
They incorporate the world map well into that same sense of progression. Something that Donkey Kong and Crash have in common is they have context for the platforms that you're jumping on. It's not like Mario, where sometimes in Mario games, especially 2D Mario games, there's just random floating blocks and mushrooms and whatever. But everything in the Crash games, as far as I can really recall, other than like the crates, which sometimes are floating, everything else is part of the environment. It is part of the castle tower, or part of a structure in the jungle or something. You're always jumping on something like real. I guess if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and one thing to bring up since we're comparing to other games would be the I'm trying to, it's not the engine, but just the gameplay mode of it is so familiar but yet unique. And when it was being made, it was referred to as Sonic's ass, where they wanted a sense of forward momentum but yet 3D as opposed to
Right.
2D Sonics of the time. And it is interesting because I can't really think of other platformers that play quite like Crash Bandicoot. And especially what's impressive is the way it transitions from 3D to 2D, and you don't even always notice when it happens, which I think is really impressive, especially for its time.
Right. I mean, for me, not having grown up on the type of platformer that Crash is, and I agree. Most platformers choose one or the other. They choose 2D, they choose 3D. If they implement both together, it's usually in a different way. Like, for instance, there might be really deep dynamic camera angles and 3D environments in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, for instance, but you're always still in that 2D plane, whereas Crash is mostly in a 3D plane, even when you're in like a flat 2D setting. Like, you can move deep into the 2D looking screen and then out into it, which is novel, but also can definitely be the cause of a lot of deaths.
Definitely, yeah. You got to really watch that, especially in the PS4 remasters. One thing to bring up as well is that because we're getting into the depth of the game, is that oftentimes, especially in 2D, it will be so that you can get a item, and these games are mostly collectathons, as well as being almost not momentum based, but platforms with very fast momentum typically. And the box placement is a big part of each of these games, and 100%ing them is such a huge thing for the fandom. So we may as well get it off the bat and say I don't think you 100% of this, did you?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think I was, for all four games, I was anywhere between like 30 and 50% completion.
I believe I've gotten gold gold relics for the first 3 games for every level.
Nice.
Not at the same time, but I got them all, and then my PlayStation broke and I got another one. I think I've gotten all of them as well again, but at least once I made a point to do it when these games first came out in the Insane trilogy. But I haven't tried to 100% it. It's a big point of criticism some people have with some of the games, box placement stuff. I wouldn't say we're approaching that angle. We're playing it as I guess you say casual or semi-casual, just
Yes.
playing through the games.
Exactly. And there are some platformers that I do complete 100%, because I have affinity for the platformer genre as a whole. I must say, growing up playing platformers my entire life, and just now playing the Crash series, the Crash games are some of the hardest platformers I've ever played. Easily, easily.
Yeah, I can definitely say that, and I will say there's probably some from my childhood that didn't cross over to the new generation I'm not thinking of. You got stuff like Croc and Croc 2 and stuff like that, which was great, but that might have been more difficult in some ways. I remember those games actually being pretty creepy, which is a funny thing.
Yeah, I've never played that one.
But anyhow, going back to Crash, for the first game, we have pretty basic boxes. We got the typical boxes full of Wumpa fruit, which are like the coins that Sonic has. Except it doesn't.
The rings, my dear sir. Oh, you just called them coins.
I was
what a
mixing
noob.
up Mario and Sonic. So you're talking about Mario.
Mario and Sonic at the Olympics. Maybe Crash needs to be invited to the Olympics next.
That would be nice. But the Wumpa fruit, if you get 100, you get an extra life. However, it's a one-hit kill in these games, unless you get a mask, and you get 2
Yes.
masks, and you can get hit twice before you one-hit kill, or 3 in which you get temporary invincibility. The masks are also found in boxes. There's also boxes that are bouncy that you can hit 5 times for many Wumpa Fruit.
Yes, and that's something I really like about these games is that the consistency of the rules of the boxes is maintained throughout all 4 of these games. So you do get rewarded, for me just having played the Insane trilogy and going into Crash 4, it's like I know what the TNT does, I know what the Nitro does, I know what all of these boxes do. So it's really nice to kind of have that consistency. Because not all like game franchises have that consistency. Like Sonic doesn't necessarily have that consistency. Sometimes not even Mario does in terms of like tools in your environment. So I really like that. It's part of the rule set, if you will.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that I think that Crash Bandicoot, the aesthetics of this weird jungle tribal Animaniacs kind of, or Looney Tunes I should say, kind of aesthetic is weird. It's very 90s. It's very of its time. Especially as the series goes on, it gets cooler where he has shades in a motorcycle. But yet it kind of just works and makes sense. And for instance, the boxes themselves, it's so intuitive. And there's just little indicators by different boxes. Like the TNT's red, Nitro's green. The other ones are just kind of a brownish orange color with different things to signify what's inside of them. And it makes gameplay so easy, and the aesthetics that give you visual hints as to what each thing does, I think is something that is really underappreciated in a game by the casual gamer.
Right. If you were to think about it, it wouldn't be doing its job. Like if you're not thinking about it, then that means it's just you're one with it. So they pull that off super well. They really just do a good job of, especially back in 1996, making a 3D environment that felt unique. Because 1996 was also the release of Super Mario 64, which was your first very popular, very successful sandbox 3D platformer. And that's one of my favorite games of all time. And I absolutely prefer that style of game. But it makes you also appreciate Crash because it didn't try to compete with Mario 64, for example. It did something completely different, which I think is very laudable, that they wanted to combine the linearity of 2D games, but with the freedom of 3D movement.
Yeah, exactly. And something that I don't think you see too much of, and you never see it done as well. I mean, one thing that blows my mind is you look at a game from, I believe it was 2006, maybe 2007, Shadow the Hedgehog, or even the Sonic Adventure games, how hard it is to control the characters at points. And if you're skating over the place, or the jumps don't go where you want them to, or they're just janky. And then you got this game from 1996 that controlled pretty much immaculately. And even people have some gripes about how they control in the newer versions, the Insane Trilogy, which I personally don't have as much issue with, but the fact that it's even a question that this game from, like almost 30 years ago controls better than modern games is pretty impressive, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd agree. And it needs that precision to succeed. And, there are parts of the difficulty that, are so insanely precise that if this game was, anywhere close to being as wonky as most Sonic games, everybody would hate the Crash Bandicoot series and it wouldn't have gotten sequels, because the Sonic games, they can be janky, but they also typically, most levels have a large expanse. There's not like tiny platforms usually that you have to jump on. So Sonic almost gets a pass for being all wild and crazy in its gameplay for some of the games. But Crash just couldn't do that. So if it hadn't been refined, like it would have, I think, bombed really hard.
Exactly, because those games are very forgiving, whereas Crash, some of the jumps are practically pixel perfect. I mean, The obvious
Yes.
example being the Road to Nowhere and the other bridge level.
Exactly. Yeah, I was wondering when we were when we were gonna get to that. Absolutely the hardest levels in Crash 1. Like, oh, it took me again, this is my ever. And it must have taken me a few dozen lives to do that first Road to Nowhere. It was rough.
You should try it drunk. It's
Yeah, right, exactly. It's like when you said that, that is like the image I was thinking of, like, oh, Road to Nowhere while drinking. Sounds impossible.
if you thought it was foggy before, it's like a Silent Hill game.
Oh man, Silent Hill, Crash Bandicoot, The Road to Nowhere.
Those levels get me. Those ones definitely are more challenging. The ones that got me through most lives replaying as an adult, though, were the tower climb levels, because they're just so long, and there's so many little details. Like specifically the one where you have to jump on the burners that every like 3 seconds will say flash up with
Yes.
flames, and there's three of them in a row, and then you have to just a little bit go backwards over the second in midair, and there's instead of a spike in the background, there's a little platform as though the spike was sawed off to a flat surface, and that probably took me like 10 lives to figure out.
Yeah, right. And that brings up something with these games and the franchise, which I think all platformers that are hard kind of have this thing where it's like there are some instances where you die in these games and it's like, shit, I had to die to even see what the hell I was supposed to do, in some of these circumstances.
Oh, definitely. There's so much trial and error and just exploration. And that's part of what I love about the games. That's why I love playing the time trials, where you just get one life and you just have to get through it, because it really, it's like training a muscle, and you get a little bit better each time, just
Yes.
rewarding in a way that isn't like you collect EXP and then get a new sword. You just become faster at responding to things, or you know what to expect as you play the level.
Absolutely. Quick aside to Crash 4, it makes you play some of the levels twice, essentially. And when I would play through them twice, the second time, there were some extra challenges. There were some moments where I was like, oh, wow, this level took me way longer last time. And that was just the first replay. So I can only imagine for the fans who play these games nonstop. I mean, absolutely, you can get good enough to get a good time trial and to 100%. And it is absolutely, it's muscle memory. That's what it all boils down to with these games.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with just getting through the levels, so finding the boxes and stuff. I mean, that's memory and just having to find things, and that's not really my forte. I'm not a scavenger in that sense with these ones,
Right.
where I want every single Wumpa fruit. With that said, though, I mean, did you try to go through all the bonus stages, or how was your approach on that?
Yeah, so essentially I would always try the bonus stages, especially in the first game. In the first game, relative to the rest of the game, they weren't like exceedingly hard for the most part. So I would always attempt them. Wouldn't always beat them, and I'd get bored because like I was never going for 100%. So I like didn't hold myself to it. But they're also very helpful because if you at least try it once, you essentially get an extra checkpoint, which is very nice.
True. I never considered that, but that makes sense.
And there's something else about the bonus stages that were actually kind of surprising to me when I first played the original, is that you can try the bonus sections as many times as you want with no penalty.
Yeah, that's a big plus, and I believe you even keep the Wumpa fruit you collect each time you play. So I think you can
Right.
kind of cheat to get more lives if you need it that way.
Yeah, right. And it's just like the rest of the game is pretty unforgiving. So to have something like that was pretty, honestly, more than fair. It was like surprising to me.
I think a big reason for that is because the bonus stages are typically puzzles. So they recognize that you need to play it more than once, and to have to get through the level just to attempt it again, I think would have been far too cruel.
Right.
Speaking of
No, I agree.
speaking of cruel, you want to start talking about the bosses in the first Crash Bandicoot game?
Yeah, man. Like almost every boss, except like the first boss was fine, but like after that, like every boss just immediately starts attacking you, especially in the first game. And it's kind of hard to figure out, like, wait, what the hell am I supposed to do? So there'd be like 5 deaths, and I'd be like 5 deaths into a boss. I still don't even know like what I have to do to win. So yeah, not the most fair boss design in the first game.
Yeah, the boss designs are interesting in the first game. The first Apu Apu is probably one of the simplest bosses in the entire series, where he essentially puts a big walking stick on the ground and spins, so that if you don't jump over it, then it will hurt you. However,
Right.
to defeat him, you just jump on him. Now he's in the center of the stage. Essentially, it's like a spoke to a wheel or something, and all that you do is just jump on him, and you could practically just do it 3 times in a row, and that's it. He's dead. It's really not much of a
Right.
challenge.
They were lulling us into a false sense of security with that guy, and then the other ones were kind of ridiculous.
Oh yeah,
Who do you think is the hardest boss in the first game? Do you think it's Cortex at the end, or it's somebody else?
I haven't played the Cortex final boss that often. I remember it being kind of tough. It did definitely cost me some lives figuring out the attack patterns and the way the different he like shoots at you, and it's like shoots out like energy balls, and you have to avoid some and spin the others, and that
Yes.
will hit him. And that took a few tries, but I think for me, Koala Kong is probably the hardest, just because there's just points where you're trying to hit that fucking rock, and another one will come, or TNT will come, and it's funny because it's so pattern based. But that's the one I tend to die on the most with repetition.
Yeah, I can see that. That was not an easy one. Um, my the one I didn't like was I think Embryo, the guy with
Oh, I
the
forgot about that. Yeah, you might be right,
because-
actually. I'm sorry, I forgot
yeah,
about him.
he wasn't the worst to start off with, but towards his later phases, he's just throwing stuff, and he's throwing stuff in such an arc, and the stage is so small. And then he like turns into Frankenstein. I didn't even realize that you could jump on his head, but it was like, oh, I can jump on his head, because I like didn't know what to do at all. Then I realized, oh, you can just jump on his head. But I didn't know you could jump on his head because I thought he was like too strong now. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
there's certain things where you just kind of have to try things, and if it works, it works.
I've had the same experience with Embryo when I first replayed it. I was like, what am I supposed to do? And I died. And the funny thing for me
Right.
with that boss is it's like, I'll play it on I'll just like ace it on the first try, or it takes like 5 lives to get through.
Right. Yeah. Again, if you have like the memory of these games, I mean, you're never going to be in that, same spot again unless it's been a long time since you played, which it sounds like it had been when the Unseen trilogy came out. Then you played it.
Oh yeah, I didn't play the first Crash game since I was in my single digits for sure. That was the one I
Wow.
played the least as a kid. So that one, like, I remembered a lot of it because I played the crap out of it, but there was still quite a few surprises.
That's good. That's good. And yeah, it should be pointed out that I've never played the original PlayStation trilogy. This is all Insane trilogy for me. But yeah, I mean, the Insane trilogy feels like how I would have imagined those original games to feel like. I know you have to be a little bit more precise, or like the hitboxes for the platforms are not as forgiving, actually. So, some people say that the Insane trilogy is actually a little bit harder. But I guess for the super fans, it should please them anyway, right?
Yeah, it definitely is harder, but I think that the original games were for kids, and these games are for people growing up who played them. and I get why maybe they would prefer that, those hitboxes, and it'd be cool as an option or something that you could do if you wanted, kind of like how Crash 4 gives you the modern or the classic version for the live system.
Right.
Ultimately, though, it's not a game breaker. It doesn't matter that much to me. And yeah, like Road to Nowhere is much more frustrating now, but it's one level that's severely affected by it, in my opinion. One thing I'll add with the Insane Trilogy is they added one level to each of the 3 games, and this one was the castle climb one towards the end of the game, which I really loved, and I really liked the platform, the timed jumps that you had to make, and learning the rhythm. It's actually one of my favorite levels in the first game.
Yeah, did they call it Stormy Ascent? Was that
That's
like the
it.
additional level?
Yeah, Stormy Ascent.
Yeah, I was too scared of that. I figured it might like make me freak out, so I was like, "No, I'll pass on that."
Yeah, I really enjoy. I mean, it's tough, but I really like that one. So do you?
Overall,
Yes,
overall, Crash Bandicoot's a weird game for you because it's actually Crash 2 was your childhood first. So did you just like went back and played Crash 1,
ex-
after you liked the second?
exactly. And it was a weird game even as a kid. I liked it a lot, but it was definitely a lot harder than the second. And I feel like the aesthetics and everything weren't defined. You didn't get the warp room yet. The vehicles weren't there. I'm
Right.
so impressed in retrospect in how they just stuck that landing with the first game and just came out running, and how good it is. But I definitely think that it's just not quite as refined as the series becomes in the second one. And that's not a slight to
Yeah.
it. That's really just commending the second for developing that aesthetic and gameplay style.
Yeah, I mean the second builds the world in a lot of ways. I mean the one game, the first game, it's just bare bones, and it's like bare bones in a good way though. It's just pure platforming, pretty much the entire game. There's not really a lot of gimmicks, There aren't the vehicles yet. There aren't the power ups yet. Crash One is just if you want to run and jump and spin, that's it. Welcome to your game. Like that is Crash One.
Exactly. And that's why Crash 1 might be the game that I've replayed the most of the original 3, because it's just pure gameplay, pure platforming. And that's what I love. Not that I don't like the other things occasionally, but Crash 1's definitely a go-to if I just want to jump on some crates and spin.
Right. No, I can absolutely see that. It's almost like the first Donkey Kong Country is kind of the easiest to pick up and beat in an afternoon. It might be that kind of similar feeling where it's like the sequels did more things and went more innovative. Um, there's something about that original that's always there though. But yeah, moving on to Crash 2, you obviously have a soft spot for this game. Just to go out the gate, I really didn't like Crash 2. Um, like a good half of the game, I didn't like because to me the stuff that they introduced didn't really gel with me. Like the hoverboard, the polar bear levels. Like there was just a lot of different stuff going on, and maybe it's just because I was learning all of these gimmicks brand new for the first time. But I actually thought Crash 2 was pretty darn hard as well.
Crash 2 is really hard in different ways than the first, I think. The first is that
Yes.
the corridors are so much more claustrophobic, especially in the sewer stages when like things are coming out at you randomly. There's dudes with flamethrowers, the water's being electrocuted. It feels hard to even breathe in those stages.
Right.
I think the second game, the funny thing is that in some ways to me it feels more repetitive than the first, in the sense that like there's really only 3 or 4 different stage types at this point. They're very aesthetically based, where you get the the hoverboard stages with the a little shop of horrors plants, and you get the beach stages, kind of like the first game, which have more turtle enemies and stuff like that, vultures. Then you get the sewer stages, and you also get the ice stages, and it's just recycling through
Yeah.
those different world types, which for some reason to me just makes the stages blend together a little bit more than the first game stages did, even though that game had much less variety.
Well, so here's the key, though, and here's why I think you and I both feel that way. Crash 2 makes the bizarre decision of floors, and it's not separated via worlds, it's separated via floors and dimensional portals and whatever. So on every floor, you'll have an ice level. On every floor, you'll have a sewer level. On every floor, you'll have a jungle level. And to me, like, there's no sense of like progression there visually. I just don't know why they did that. Like, they could have done an ice world and had all the ice levels together and maybe swapped the level gimmicks out. Like, you know, do the polar bear an ice level on floor 1 and then do like the baby dinosaur in the jungle on floor 2 or something. So they could have mixed the gimmicks around. The fact that the aesthetics are just like haphazardly thrown around, I thought was just weird. It didn't do anything for me.
I definitely get what you're saying, and I'm honestly glad they didn't go that route, because like dealing with the ice physics for a whole world, I think would be off-putting to some people. And
that's true, right?
One thing I like is I grew up on the Mega Man games as well as these games, and with each series, you got to. So let's say you were stuck on a level, you could still play 4 other levels and get through
that
them.
Is
you
true.
have your choice on how to tackle them. And it is strange. It's a weird choice and an uncommon choice. You don't see it very often, especially in these kind of platformer games where you choose the stages at 1 out of 5. But I like that. I think it gives the series just a unique identity that you don't really see as much. It's almost like Mario 64 with the castle and how that works.
I could see that being a hit with kids who can't get past this one level, but they want to try something else. But for me, I was like a cynical adult, and I was like going left to right throughout the room, and it didn't throughout the floor, and it didn't matter to me.
Yeah, that's how I play it too, typically. One thing I want to address is that this game introduces the slide, and I believe the double jump as well. It's been a minute, but
and then like I think the slide jump, which I used some in this game, but I really used in Crash 3 to get that kind of extra height. That feels really good.
Oh, it's so satisfying. And Crash 4 has a different slide jump that I also really like. But it's funny because this slide jump, I think, is in the 2 different gameplay styles, is used so well and yet so differently between the 2.
I mean, they were expanding Crash's 4 move momentum. I mean, so I would say that absolutely got improved in Crash 2. I think Crash 2, they were experimenting a lot, I think, in Crash 2. Like, maybe they didn't have a handle on the controls for the jet board as well as they could. Because, like, you play the jet board in Crash 4, and it's like, oh, I can handle this. You play the jet board in Crash 2 for the first time, and it's like, I hate this.
It's fun. I'm so used to the jet board that like I don't really question it as much as I question like the motorcycle or the biplane,
right?
Which is just funny, and it can be tough, especially like where you're really stuck between the plants and you just have to sacrifice a mask, or you just don't really know what to do, especially if you're going for a time trial and you're not just going through it cautiously. So you can jump and spin them all out. You know, it really puts you in tight positions like that. And one thing I want to talk about in the second game is the bees.
Oh my god, yeah.
They are so tough, and they do this thing where there's like these timed electric gates, so that there's things on the ground that are like a turbo boost. It temporarily makes Crash run faster, which are helpful to get you out of tough situations, but if you're not careful, will get you down in bottomless pit, or it will put you right into the electric gate, which I will take a moment to commend the series for their creativity with Crash's death sequences. They have unique animations for each different way that he dies, and they're comedic and just entertaining, and it kind of softens the blow of dying when you can't
Right.
really help but laugh at some of the ways that he dies.
Yeah, you're getting rewarded with the humor of it. I absolutely agree. That's a strong point in the series. Yeah, like for his death animation with the bees, like his hands and feet will blow up and then his head. Like, I definitely got a kick out of that.
Yeah, and he'll fall down a pit, and you see the shoes fly up in the air.
Exactly. And he gets electrocuted, he gets caught on fire. I mean, just what hasn't happened to him at this point.
Exactly. Like in Sonic, for instance, if he drowns, you get a unique death animation, and if he dies any other way, then he just pops up, and kind of the same as the drowning, but just a different face, where he pops up and you know he's dead. But with this one, there's like a dozen different ways that Crash can die.
It's beautiful. But yeah, the B levels were hard. Couple jetpack levels were hard just because it was like another wrench thrown in the system super late in the game. It's like, oh my god, I have to learn to play another new game. Like, holy crap.
Yeah, the jetpacks you definitely have to be in the mood for them. Like,
Yes.
Sometimes, once again, I'll breeze right through it first try, get every box, no big deal. Other times, it is just, it feels like trigonometry, trying to get through those wires.
Yeah, it slows the momentum of the game down so much. It's like, and then you get jumpy, and it's like, oh, I can go. Oh no, the tentacle thing killed me again.
One thing I can definitely say is that, especially for its time period, like in I don't know, 1997 or 8 or whenever it came out.
Yeah, Crash 2 was 97.
I thought so. I thought it was year after year for the first three.
Yeah, they were
pumped them out, and I think
Donkey
the
Kong Country series did that too. So it's another similarity there.
And like when you get to ride the polar bear and you get to run away from the boulder like Indiana Jones, and especially when you get the jetpack as a kid, that was the coolest thing. That felt like next level gaming and just such a huge expansion of the world. Whereas playing these games now, I definitely think that the luster has worn off on some of the gimmick stages in this series.
Right.
But overall, I can.
Well, that's a good point that you make, is that they are made for children. They're made to kind of, appease them with, giving them something new frequently.
Yeah.
Even if it's hard as balls.
Yes, and almost 25 years ago. And it's something that, even though the game looks new and plays very smoothly for the most part, it's something that can be hard to remember. That, like, oh, this is a game that's like almost as old as me.
Right. Yeah, and it is, the first Crash is as old as I am, so it's kind of a weird thing to think.
But overall, I will say I personally really like Crash 2. I will say, well, I'll save my ranking for the end of, I guess we could rank the trilogy and then see how the fourth compares after, if that sounds good.
Yeah. Works.
But I really think Crash 2 is a solid addition to the series. It is definitely a stepping stone between Crash 1 and Crash 2. It develops a lot of things. I think it has its own set of problems that the first doesn't, while improving many problems of the first.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Then going to Crash 3, they refined a lot of the stuff that I think they were trying to add into the series. And I really enjoyed Crash 3 from like the moment you were kind of going into historical periods, and the corridors seemed wider. You had a little bit more freedom. I was just really all about Crash 3 as it kept going along.
Definitely. When I am more negative on Crash 3 than the other two, depending on my mood, because I am not about the gimmick stages. With that said, when Crash 3 works, it really, really hits it out of the park. Especially like,
right.
Even like the very first stage of the game, when you are going through medieval times, and you got the toad, and if it touches you, it kisses you, and he turns into a prince, and you get the
Right.
wizards, and then you go into like a tomb, and you're sliding in oil, and you're going from platform to platform, and all that stuff to me is just incredible. It's some of the best platform in the game. It's by far the best game in the series aesthetically. It is the most well defined.
Right.
I think the warp room is much better than in the second one.
I think the music kept getting better in the series with each game.
Oh,
as well.
definitely. That's a very good point.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge part of platformers for me is music, because like your story is always pretty light for these games. So if there's any emotional subtext or any like tone that the studio wants to set, it's usually done so through music. And I think this game does that really well.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Now, it's hard to discuss this game comprehensively because it is broken down into so many different types of levels, not just by time zones or time periods. Yeah, you got Eastern or Western time zone stages.
Yeah, right.
But also gameplay styles, some of which I think work better than others. So you just want to run the gamut on that, and we could start with the tiger scenes where you get to play as Crash's sister Coco for the first time in the series.
Yeah, I really liked those levels. I thought that they were a fun and better evolution of like the polar bear levels in the last game.
Yeah, I really love those stages. I think they're fun. I'm always down for them. I don't know if I like them more than the polar bear stages, because the polar bear stages are quite frankly just easier. But
really, I thought the tiger ones were way easier.
that's funny. Maybe it's I don't know, muscle memory.
It could be, yeah.
I think the tiger stages are more sophisticated. There's more alternate routes to take, and you're going between, like, you could hit a jump or you could miss it to get different things. One thing that the
I think the
tiger
corridors
has,
were wider too. I feel like there's a little bit more room to move, so maybe that might be why I felt it was a little easier.
well, also tiger has invincibility if you charge and you're going towards certain enemies, not all of them, but certain ones you
Right.
can just burst through, and that's really helpful. Especially if you're speed running it. I have gotten through those levels so fast, I don't know how it's possible, just because of that feature.
Right. I definitely like those levels. It didn't feel like anything too different than what we've gotten in the past. Which leads to, I think, the next. Well, there were underwater levels in this game, so I guess that's another type of gimmick level, which I actually liked.
Yeah, I love them as a kid. I think it's smart. They're they're entirely 3D. You get a vehicle in the underwater stages that functions as both a mask and kind of a gun, which if you get hit once, of course, it's destroyed, and I think that's very fun. Cool enemies, the pufferfish, the shark. You get these whirlwind things that kill you in one hit and suck you up into it. I will say, though, unless I'm playing the game front to back, I almost always skip the underwater stages. It's not a conscious thing that I can break down logically, but I think it's just the pacing. I think it's just a little bit the gameplay slower and more deliberate, so I just don't play it when I'm having fun speedrunning. But I do like the stages.
Yeah, I don't think they're like the best levels or anything. For me, I had just finished playing like all of Crash 2, so it was like a new kind of variety. So it was definitely refreshing for me. But yeah, no, they're at their most fun when you are like shooting with the torpedo mask.
Definitely, and using that little mini boost and immediately running into something and dying.
Yes.
After that, we get the motorcycle stages, which is so cool in concept. It's essentially the template for Crash Team Racing, where you're just racing on a motorcycle, and there's different cars, and there's cop cars that may block you. There's bottomless pits, ramps you have to hit, boost platforms on the ground that'll speed you up and have you do a little wheelie. And there's one huge fucking flaw in these levels that holds them back so much. And I'll have you guess what I'm getting at.
You have to get first place or else you lose.
Well, there's that, but I was going to say the turning is so
Oh yeah, no, the
hard.
turning sucks.
If they fix that one thing, I'd love those levels. But it is so impossibly difficult. And I hear that, because I don't remember the levels being this hard as a kid at all. I remember them just being fun. And I heard that with Insane Trilogy, they really made it stiffer. And I don't doubt that because it does not feel how I remember it.
Oof. Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. There are 3 of these motorcycle levels in the game. First one, I beat it on my first try. I got first place on my first try.
Oh yeah, that one's cool. That one's easy enough.
Yeah, the first one, easy as shit. The second one, I think, is the hardest level in the game.
Yeah, it's.
That took me like 20 tries. I shit you not.
I would always get like second or something.
Yeah, it's just so fucking aggravating. You really can't make more than like one small mistake, or else you'll just not get first place. And it's like a fucking minute and a half race. Like, it is strenuous. And then the third level was like not easy, but it was not as hard as the second one. I don't know why the second one in the middle of the game is the worst level in the game, but to me it was.
I think some of it is that you're so primed by the time you beat the second one, and you're expecting so much worse for the third. And I think it's easier too, the third one. However, even if it was the same difficulty, it would probably seem easier because you've just buffed yourself up so much by grinding that second level.
Right.
Now I will say,
yeah,
I think there is a 4th motorcycle level because there's 5 hidden stages in this game, and a motorcycle is one of them. But that's
I did not attempt to seek those out.
I did play through all of those, and it doesn't add anything to the game, honestly. It's just another motorcycle level if you need that in your life.
Oh, I'm missing out.
Another motorcycle, another jet ski level with Coco, and another biplane that's kind of race oriented, where you have to go through rings like Superman 64. The bonus stages in Spyro the Dragon.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's cool, but it's not essential. But the jet ski levels are maybe my favorite of the new additions, actually. I really love those levels.
Yeah, no, they were interesting. At first, I was scared. I was like, oh god, a jet ski? Is this going to be as wonky as like the hoverboard or the raft or whatever? But no, you can kind of take your time too, which is nice.
That's what
There's no real pressure to keep moving.
That's what I love about the levels is a lot of people do not like the controls for it in this game. And I with the Insane Trilogy, once again, they said they changed it. I don't have an issue with this particular one. I think it plays fine. What I love is that it feels good being on the water. You feel playing it as though you're actually on a jet ski. It's logical. It's fun to hit the ramps, and you can go for speed if you want, or you can look for every box, take your time, turn around to get it, go through all the alternate paths. I think they're just very well designed, fun levels that feel open, but yet they're very linear.
Right. I agree. What do you think about the dogfight levels? Because they were interesting.
Honestly, I think they suck, and
yeah,
I don't think they're particularly difficult so much as irritating.
No, that's why they're interesting. They're like the easiest levels in the entire game.
Yeah, it's like you just shoot at the blimps, and then every now and then you have to swat at some flies, and then you get back to work. As a kid,
you win. That's cool. It.
As an adult, they're kind of boring, and I usually skip them if I'm playing through this one.
Right. It's just I found it so weird. Like, aviator pilot crash is like, okay, that's cool. The concept is there. Again, this was an instance where I was just like, okay, I think Naughty Dog's just like spraying themselves way too thin, and that's why this has like no substance.
Yeah, I think that it was two things. Naughty Dog really did, and same with Spyro. It's so funny how similar those two series are in their trajectory. And I remember
Right.
Spyro 3 being my personal favorite of those, or tied with Ripto's Rage at least, but they only wanted to do so many of them, but the studio's like, no, make more games. This is a cash cow and we're going to milk it. And so they didn't know what to do by the third one. So they just threw everything at the wall. And I think that on one hand, they could have just developed more platforming and better platforming and maybe developed some of the mini games more and not had all the different kinds. However, I still think for the most part it turns out well. I also think so much of it was, this is my other point, they're trying to compete with Mario, they're trying to compete with Sonic, they're trying to compete with Spyro. They really just wanted as many Crash skins. Like, look, he's on a motorcycle, he's an aviator pilot, he's underwater. You know, they really wanted to sell this character and show how flexible he could be, and that we can get a kart racer game, you can get a Mario Party type game.
Yeah, they were trying to capitalize on the mascot, absolutely. Which they would later do, at least with Crash Team Racing and Activision's billion spinoffs that don't count anymore in between 1998 and 2020.
Yeah. One thing I'll say too, once again, I've said it before, but I'll repeat. I think the platforming isn't as challenging as the first game, but I think it's the most fun in the series, generally speaking. I think the level design's the most fun. The environments,
Yes, I would agree.
The most engaging. And I really love the dinosaur stages, which you're walking through this murky black water. There's volcano everywhere. You get, speaking of competing with Mario, you get Yoshi in it. You hatch a dinosaur egg and then ride on him, if that sounds familiar to anyone. And there's this creepy ape man thing that lurks in the oily water and jumps out at you that I've always found very creepy, to this day.
Right.
But
yeah, that was where the aesthetic really came into. You got like the prehistoric jungle and the volcanoes, and then there's one, instead of being chased by a boulder, you're being chased by a T-Rex, I think, or it's just they really incorporated the different historical aesthetics really well into this game.
Yeah, I think it was a Stegosaurus in this one, and then of course a T-Rex.
Oh, I think you are right.
I feel like there was a T-Rex stage in the third, but I think I'm just conflating the two. But
right, yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, those levels just have everything. You got vehicles, you got platform, you got linear parts, you got chase sequences. The mummy stages, the Arabian Nights-esque stages. I mean, there's a lot of variety here, a lot of different platforming styles, and just really fun stuff. I mean, for me, it's a shame because there's so much of the series' best content, but yet it's bogged down by stuff that, in my opinion, is just a little bit mediocre.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's kind of like the best and the worst of the series thus far, and the worst isn't even bad, but it's just really not what you came here for, kind of deal.
Yeah, it's hardly a deal breaker unless you're stuck on a motorcycle stage and can't play the rest of the game, in which case you're just screwed.
Which is very possible.
Yeah, especially if you're a kid.
Something that Crash 3 does that is interesting that I hadn't anticipated was it gives you a new ability after every boss you defeat.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the bosses, but the new abilities are equally as important. And I think they're really helpful. You get a run ability. You get a triple spin that allows you to hover in the air a little bit. You get, I think it's either the double jump or the body slam. And
yeah, the double jump is unlockable. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And then you get a bazooka, which is worthless.
No, it's not worth. What are you talking about? The bazooka is the most overpowered thing in the whole franchise, dude.
I know, and that's... I should say it's worthless to me because A, it's a pace killer, and B, like stuff like in the robot levels, it's so easy just to like shoot, or the futuristic levels, it's so easy just to like shoot a TNT crate or to just shoot the robot. I don't know. It just takes a challenge out of the game
Oh
for me.
yeah, I'm not saying it's like a good addition to the game, but yeah, like if you are frazzled at your wits end and you just want like the last world of the game to be over, the bazooka will help you out.
No, it's
A pretty
true.
good margin.
In utilitarian purposes, it definitely can help you as a player. And I will admit, I do use it occasionally.
But yeah, in terms of like pacing, like it's definitely like a weird thing to be in the game. That's definitely not what I expected.
Especially because the aiming's always like Crash is pointing right at the ground, and you have to orient it to wherever you want instead of being like the center of the
Yeah,
screen or somewhere logical.
yeah, it's weird. If it almost should have, if you're close enough to a crate or an enemy, it should almost have like some sort of lock-on feature.
I definitely agree, or something, and just like the calibration to move it around, it seems so slow. I just hate it. I don't like the bazooka.
Right. I can agree with that. Um, and we did talk about Crash 1's bosses, but overall, what did you think about Crash 2 and three's bosses? Because we never really talked about Crash 2's, because honestly, they kind of all blend together. I remember Cortex, his final boss in Crash 2 was like the easiest boss in the whole series for some reason. It's like you catch up to him with a jetpack and it's like, oh, you won.
Yeah, it's pretty easy, but it's still fun. I still like that level. I think that jetpack level's the best in terms of just
Yeah,
like going through and avoiding the asteroids, and it's really like a Sonic thing, like in Sonic Adventure 2 or Sonic Generations, especially, is the same kind of boss fight. Even though, of course, those came out later. But
right.
I'm trying to think of the boss fights in Crash 2. We get Ripperoo, a blue dog that's insane and plants TNT crates, and that's more of a pattern based boss that I think's fun. It doesn't really
Yeah,
hold up
I
to
like that
repetition,
boss.
but it's a memorable, cool fight.
Yeah, no, I agree.
We were
Um,
also introduced to Tiny Tiger, who is my favorite boss in the series.
yes. And they use like him again in Crash 3 and other characters just to comedic effect in the bosses, like what historical period they're in, etc.
Yeah, I think Tiny Tiger, his boss fight in Crash 3 is my favorite in the series. I really love the aesthetics of that one in the Coliseum. Um, I,
Right.
I love the variety of it when he's jumping around. I remember playing as a kid, and it just being such a victorious moment when I got to jump on his body. Oh, that and Dingo Dial. Dingo Dials in Crash 3 is another favorite. That is a great boss fight.
I agree. Such a great boss fight that he would become a playable character.
It's true, and that is weird, but for the most part, that works, and we'll get to that. But I think Crash 3
Yes.
by far has the best boss fights across the board.
Yeah. I definitely felt that way. Absolutely. Like we're never as unfair and like confusing as the first game's bosses. They were definitely more memorable than Crash 2 bosses.
Yes, I definitely agree with that, and I think that's pretty much what I got for Crash 3. I mean, I'm very very positive on it, but it does have the negative points that I have on that one are a little more prevalent than the first two. But for me, it's the first three Crash games are Neapolitan ice cream. Sometimes I want chocolate ice cream. Sometimes I want strawberry. Other days I want vanilla.
Right.
And I would definitely say that
Right.
Crash 1 is vanilla, Crash 2 is chocolate, and Crash 3 is strawberry.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And yeah, they do have their strengths and weaknesses. So they do stand out from each other, which I think is a good thing, especially looking back and playing them all at once, to make them feel distinct. If I were to rank the trilogy, I would, from best or to most, from most favorite to least favorite, I would say Crash 3, Crash 1, Crash 2. Um, Crash 3 just felt more fun, I think a little less difficult than the past two games. I didn't feel depth perception killing me as much in Crash 3 than the first two games. Because we can probably all relate to this, where it's like you have fixed camera angles, and sometimes it's, oh, I misjudged that jump. I went too far or not far enough. Um, Coupled with, the more comfortable game design and the better bosses and aesthetics. Most of the gimmick levels are good in Crash 3. That's why Crash 3 is my favorite of the trilogy. Crash 1, like you said, it's just kind of like you're getting what you came for, kind of hard to the core platforming, and then Crash 2 lost me here and there. It's still a good game. Yeah, there's the levels where I'm like, I don't want to play that again.
For me, it really just depends on the day of the week. But typically, probably 5 days a week, I would actually go Crash 1, Crash 2, and Crash 3. And the main reason for that for me is that Crash 1, in my opinion, is all killer, no filler, aside from like the boss fights.
Right.
I can play through that one almost any day of the week. The second one, I think, is kind of the best of both worlds, where you get a little more of that variety. It's not quite as grueling with these incredibly long stages that are borderline impossible at some points in the night. And but it also, like you said, it does feel somehow more repetitive than the first. And the third game, to me, I think has some of the highest highs of the series, but also some of the lowest lows. And quite frankly, if I'm not in the mood, I will skip a third of the game when I play through it, and that's a pretty big deal breaker for me in the ranking.
Yeah, no, that definitely add up all of the motorcycle levels and the underwater levels and a few of the other gimmick levels, and that's probably almost half the game right there.
With that said, I mean, I'd give the games like a 10, 10, and 9.5. Like, saying it's the worst of the trilogy for me is really not an insult by any stretch of the imagination. I love all these games dearly.
Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds like we are ready to move on to Crash 4. It's about time.
Yes. So it's funny because when this game was announced, it was, I would say, cautious optimism. I am familiar with Toys for Bob. I am not necessarily a fan or a hater. I played the reignited Spyro trilogy. I liked it. I appreciated being able to replay some of my favorite games. However, I had some issues with the design choices. And I actually have some issues with the Crash Insane trilogy redesigns and stuff like that as well a little bit. For the most part, it works in both instances, but there's certain issues with the background that just doesn't work for me. Particularly the water in the Crash games. The water in Crash 1 in the temple levels, to me, looks horrendous. It has just no depth. It doesn't look like water. It just looks like some kind of weird diorama, fake water you put in like a train set or something. And I don't like it. The color's off. The realistic lighting and fur textures on Crash and Coco are kind of creepy, as well as Crash's weird lips that worked for the PlayStation 1 models. And in game, he looks amazing. But in cutscenes and stuff, you're like, what the fuck? It looks like something from like a DreamWorks movie, and I don't mean that as a compliment.
Yeah. No, like, well, when you're playing as him, it's like you're almost always looking at his back or his side, and it just kind of melts with everything else. But yeah, I will agree. The ultra fuzzy texture and just the general look is kind of weird with the Insane Trilogy redesign. Thankfully, Crash 4's design is one of the, if not the best, I think he's ever looked as a character, honestly.
I personally did not like the designs when they were released. They've grown on me, though, and that is a big point why I want to bring up the announcement, because I had a little bit of trepidation. Would it be worth it after so many bad sequels? And the designs I wasn't so on, particularly Coco. I thought her head looked weird. She has a weird... So Crash is V-shaped, and they really accentuate that in this game, and Coco is like a capital A. And I thought her face looked weird, the body shape was weird, and Crash looked not bad, but just different. I still prefer the PlayStation 1 models. I still prefer for pretty much every character in the game. I like Beanox's designs, which were just updated versions of the Insane Trilogy models for the Crash Team Racing PlayStation 4 version. I think that was the most fully realized we've seen for the most part. But in game, and I do have issues still with some of the aesthetics I can get into later, I think it works really well when you're playing the game and in the cutscenes. And there's so many different skins that, like, I don't like the vanilla Crash and Coco look as much as other people may. But there's skins in it that look incredible. Like, I use the biker skins from Crash 3 for Crash and for Coco, or the artist one for Coco, or the one where Crash is, after you beat the game, it looks like he just came out of the hospital with, like, a black eye and he's in casts everywhere. And that's a lot of fun. And that's rewarding to play a level to get a new skin, I will say right off the bat.
Yeah, honestly, I think the 100% completion, or just the gradual completion rewards, are best in Crash 4, because you can always go for a specific costume. There's not gems that you have to pick up in levels, which honestly always is a weird thing about Crash 2 and 3 to me, because they're almost always in plain sight. But the fact that you can just not get them, it just kind of seems weird. It's almost like, oh, just have a quick animation where he gets the gem at the end of the level. No, you have to get it in a very obvious place every time.
I think it's just rewarding visually to see. Honestly, I think that's the only reason it existed. And I will say, I mean, obviously this game, it's obvious, but it's worth mentioning. This game did come out in 2020 as opposed to the 1990s. So, of course, there's things that should be updated in the costume system, even though it's a gimmick. Is just something that makes it seem a little more modern for what many would consider to be an outdated game philosophy of just quick platforming.
Right. Well, that's why it was so nice to see it this year. I mean, I don't think we've really gotten any other platformers this year. So to get a resurgence like this 22 years later is pretty amazing.
Yeah, so I'll just start from the beginning because there are different worlds in this one. It's an interesting blend of games where it has a first game's map as opposed to the warp room, which makes sense because this is a linear story in this one. But the game begins with Crash waking up on the beach and going towards a weird, I don't know, vibration that Aku feels or something. But what I love about this first level, and it's one of my favorites in the game for this reason almost alone, is that you start on the beach and you get deeper and deeper into the jungle and you feel real progression where it begins very similar to the first game, and by the end of the level you're like, damn, I went places. Like, the environment changed like 3 or 4 different times. It's very cinematic despite all being in gameplay, and I loved that.
Yeah, no, they definitely went way harder with the story and the cinematics, the voice acting, just everything in Crash 4. It definitely seems like a more modern package, because, you know, an established mascot character, and who knows if they're going to make another one, so might as well go all out. I think like it's like the Invader Zim guy is like first the Space Distortion mask or something. It's just like they have a lot of funny characters. It felt like I was watching a Saturday morning cartoon most of the time I was playing.
Definitely. And I think like what's so great is they keep the gameplay feels mostly the same, but yet it's being pushed to the modern limits of technology with gaming now. So it feels familiar, but yet you're still constantly being surprised. And one thing with me with platforms, I laugh a lot, especially like if I die or there's like a wrench through my system I don't expect. I just have a lot of fun. It's almost like a comedy thing, even when it's not necessarily always funny. I just have such joy with it, and I was constantly just laughing at the game or just respecting the different challenges it sent my way.
Yeah, they do that really well in Crash 4. Another thing that I really like in Crash 4, which goes back to what I was talking about in Crash 2, is like, oh, these levels are mix and match, and they are in Crash 3 as well. I like the fact that you can go to separate worlds and that they were themed to a year, but also a place. And then with the additional characters that you end up unlocking, you get to go back and kind of see how all of their levels mix together. Everything really feels connected in this game, which is kind of ironic since it's a game about hopping between dimensions.
Yeah, and I think what makes it work so well, like you said, it's year and location. So like, there's I think 3 levels set in New Orleans, but yet each one has
Oh
a
yes,
wildly different aesthetic. Where the first one looks like something out of the movie Coco, where it's like
yes,
nighttime, there's music, and it looks like a Rayman stage actually at points. It takes the block creatures that you walk on, and they look like librarians or something like that, which is a design choice I personally don't understand. Or like, why are the fucking blocks alive and have eyes and glasses? It's just stupid and illogical and just off-putting in my opinion. But it looks like something out of Rayman, that whole level. But then the next stage
right.
looks like something out of like Crash 3 almost, and it's very modern New Orleans and swamp, and it's really fun, and each level has its own feel, which I really appreciate.
Yes, and that's the thing. They have 10 worlds in this game, so they don't make you stay around in the same like kind of biome for too long. Yeah, and I was hoping you'd mention that world because that level was so fun. The Mardi Gras New Orleans level, and then you get introduced to a new character in the next level. Um, I don't think we can talk about Crash 4 without talking about the other characters and just general. Because in the Insane Trilogy, you could always switch between Crash and Coco. But I never did that because like the story was never like, oh, Coco went with Crash to do everything. Like she didn't. So like I would maybe play as her once and then switch back to Crash. But since the narrative presented Crash and Coco were like doing everything together in Crash 4, I actually switched between Crash and Coco quite a bit, I think, just because it felt like it made sense this time.
Yeah, I'm the same way. It's funny because like on Crash Team Racing, I main as Coco, but in the original 3 games, I'm always Crash, and I've tried playing as Coco just to change it up, and it distracts me. Just her character model, just the different color when she spins, a ponytail. I don't know why. It just doesn't feel right. It feels like I'm cheating on
Right,
Crash, and I don't like it. Um, in this
right.
game, I played it straight through as Crash, and then I played it as both of them for each level to get all the skins. And now I typically play as Coco, but go back and forth depending on my mood. And I think it's a kind of just fun and adds another layer to the game that's mostly superficial, but
Oh,
still
absolutely.
engaging.
But yeah, it's that kind of like extra charming touch though that I think helps make the game feel just well loved, like an homage to the what the series has been so far. Um, but not afraid to try something new too, because the alternate dimension version of Tana is essentially a new character, and then Dingo Dial is just one of the bosses from the old games that is playable because somebody at Toys for Bob must really love Dingos and alligators. So, and then you get to play as Dr. Neocortex as well. And honestly, I just love all 3 of those additional characters. Their playstyles are really fun overall. Um, I think I have my favorites. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that as well.
Not much, honestly. You could tell Toys for Bob, or not Boys for Bob. You could tell they worked on Year of the Dragon because it feels very similar to that and the new characters in that game, which I personally preferred the Year of the Dragon side characters, which didn't bother me at all somehow. Same with the skateboarding levels in that game that should have pissed me off, but yet I had fun with. But in this game, it kind of depends on the character. I never really replay the levels for fun, if that says much. I usually skip over them 99% of the time unless I'm just grinding. But like, I would say for me, Tana, I hate her new design. I don't like her character. Um, it just felt shoehorned in and just forced and unoriginal. I've talked about it before,
Wow,
but
such a hater, man.
originally she was supposed to look like Bindi Irwin, and that made sense for like the aesthetics of Crash Bandicoot. but because Mad Max Fury Road exists, she's just Furiosa. But her character's like, whoa, dude, cool, spicy food. And it's just forced to me and just kind of cringy. And
Yeah, but to be honest, like everything in the Crash Bandicoot series kind of feels that way to me. Like everything is out of place. So in my opinion, therefore nothing is. Like Crash is like jumping around like feudal China and then like medieval Middle Ages and then like oh, but he's also punching Jamaicans in the first game. And it's just like everything is so wacky.
I get what you mean.
It's like every
and that's definitely always
just
been a
kind
part
of
of it, but
the make me feel.
But with this one case, it felt like such a clear, this is a trend. We have to hit a diversity quota for this animated game with talking animals. So let's just do this thing that fans like. And to me, it just felt
That
inorganic.
we furries like our thick goddesses.
Yeah, and I mean, her levels themselves aren't terrible, but I don't think she adds anything to the gameplay that's really that notable. You get the whip,
Right.
which can be helpful, but to me, it's almost like the bazooka. It's better done than the bazooka.
Yes.
I don't mind her levels or playing as her, but I don't look forward to it. I don't particularly enjoy it. Dingo Dial for me was the best in terms of gameplay and character.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Um,
Yeah, he's absolutely my favorite. Going back to my thoughts on Tana is like I really like her character, but her gameplay is either really good, like I'm in the flow with her gameplay, like I am Crash or Coco, but then there are some times where things don't work quite as well. Like the wall jump sometimes just didn't work for me. Like I don't know what it was. It was like a little finicky sometimes. Then the grapple hook, there were some times where it was like, oh, you would think it worked, but you always have to be facing the way it is, and you know maybe after a wall jump, you're not always facing the way the grapple point is. So that tricked me up like a few times. It was like hard to learn that kind of part of it, but you know, I would say she's probably is the weakest of the three because she's most like Crash and Coco. I'm just kind of a worse version with a couple unique moves. A Dingo Dial, yeah, you can start talking about him because he is both of our favorites for sure.
yeah, and I'll just add some quick context. I know everybody's dying to know what happened to Dingo Dial between games, but Naughty Dog was done with Crash after Crash Racing, whatever it's called, and so at the end credits, they went over what each of the characters does after they retire. And Dingo Dial, he opens up a restaurant. And I believe in Crash 3, they even have signs for it in the motorcycle levels. And they definitely have a stage built around it, him having his diner in Crash Team Racing. So they stick with that, with the characters, which I think is really fun and charming, that they kept that continuity. And he essentially opens up a diner, and he doesn't burn people anymore. He just burns food. And he has a vacuum thing that he uses now, which I have to admit is kind of irritating that we play as Dingo Dial and we don't get to use his flamethrower. Because they could have done pulses, they could have done steady fire. I wish they would have done that. But the vacuum works really well, and it's a lot of fun as a mechanic. So as a fan, I would have preferred something, but I'm not bitching because I'm happy with what we got.
Yeah. And it gives me a Luigi's Mansion vibe, just kind of using it as a projectile, which I honestly, flamethrower seems more faithful on surface level, but I think the vacuum might be more interesting in terms of gameplay. Because what would a flamethrower do but be another attack? And you can already swing his fat ass and hit like 30 boxes with one swing of your tail, which is also very satisfying.
It is, and what's funny is he he moves like the father in that movie or the show Dinosaurs, a Steven Spielberg show from the 90s, if you've seen it.
Oh god, that's horrifying.
And he just feels heavy and thick as fuck when you're playing the game.
Yes.
You feel his
He
weight
cannot even
somehow.
walk normally. He's precious.
Although when he jumps on boxes, he doesn't just crush all of them. I don't believe he just does each individual box, which is a bit of an immersion breaker. So I'm gonna have to drop the game down by at least 3 points to
Right.
reflect
But they
that.
did like the mosquitoes were giant and fat that he would jump on in like his first level. So they, to me, it was like, oh, okay, the enemies have to be thick as well. So it was kind of making sense for a little bit there.
Yeah, it wouldn't. It would be unfair for Dingo Dow to punch below his weight division. So he has to
Yeah.
fight the thick mosquitoes. One thing I love is that the game has, I think, one instance of vulgarity, maybe two, but I believe it's only one, and it's from the Australian voiced character Dingo Dial, and he says "cunt" at one point in the game.
What?
Oh
I
wait, no, he
don't
says
know if I heard
bastards. I'm
that.
sorry.
He called them like bastards when they blew up his diner.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, you're jerking my chain.
Yeah, I was making an Australian joke.
Ah, those cunts. Good to
Just
see it.
once, what I would give, I would pay them so much money for Dingo Dial fully animated to just say that at some point in the game.
Maybe it's really deep in the code. You got to 200% the game, Todd.
That would be so worth it. They need to do
I
Cameo.
get it.
Crash Bandicoot Cameo, where you can get them to say and do things for you.
I don't know if you make enough money for that.
I'll put in the hours. But yeah, I think he's really satisfying. I think Cortex is interesting as well, especially a mechanic where he has his ray gun in it, and he can turn enemies into platforms.
Yes, and I love his gameplay when it's a more of a 2D style. There are some parts of his levels where you're going down 3D corridors. I feel like he's really boring when he's going down a corridor. But when you are actually doing the turning the platforms into bouncy platforms and just moving left to right, I think that's where he shines the best. So I think for the most part, his character really works. Dingo Dial is still my favorite to play as, but it was a really good idea to kind of give this character some playtime. And the way that they like incorporate his levels in with the story, especially, I think is really smart.
I agree, and I think I definitely agree with the 2D because in my opinion, with 3D Cortex, especially with his dash that he has, where like you kind of like zip really fast across the screen to get somewhere, which is really helpful at points. There's a bit of a depth perception issue sometimes where you have to be precise to make sure you get to where you need to go with some of these jumps. And in the 3D
Yes.
portions of his levels, it's a little more difficult than it needs to be, whereas a 2D I think it works pretty much immaculately.
Yeah, exactly. You can see what you're doing more in 2D, and the the dash in midair is really kind of this quantum move where it's like you really got to go the full dash. So you're either doing it or you're not. So you can kind of tell where that's going to be way better in 2D. So
One thing
all
I'll
in
say,
all,
oh sorry,
I was just going to say all in all, the characters add really good sense of variety, and I really appreciate variety in these kinds of games, especially since I've played all four of these games like within a month and a half for the first time.
one thing I'd like to get into the elemental mass, but before that I will add, and this is a major issue with the game in my opinion. First of all, at each of the moments where you're in a level and it intersects with these alternate plot lines, Crash and Coco stops and looks at the camera with question marks over their head after something happens that the other character will cause to happen. You'll find out in those side levels. It's not a huge issue. Like if you're doing a time trial, the game just stops and the timer stops for them to do this animation. But it does kind of, I wish they didn't have to stop and look at you. It just kind of breaks my flow personally. That's not a huge issue,
Yeah.
however, and this is a huge issue for me. When you're doing these levels, especially when you're going for the under 3 deaths or the all the boxes or any of those relics, you have to replay half the level as Crash or Coco after you
I
beat
know.
the side level.
Yeah, which is such a weird choice, and they usually just add more like nitro boxes or something to make it a little bit more difficult. But yeah, the remix kind of level thing, I'm not sure why they did it, if they're just recycling content because they couldn't make a full uh, level for the other character. It's just kind of a very weird choice.
I hate to say it, but it just feels like padding, especially when you also have the inverted levels for every single level of the game. And I don't mind the inverted levels. I think it's kind of fun. You get different box placements. They're, let's say instead of going right to left, you go left to right or whatever. It's not a
Right.
game. It's not like my favorite thing in the game, but worst case scenario, you just don't play it. And that's how I feel with this game, where the boxes are outrageous. There's up to 500 boxes roughly in some of these levels, and they are hidden just all over the place. There's hidden special gems that you have to find in environments, or just making a jump on a rail at this impossible split second. And it really bothers some fans how hard it is to 100% it, and I don't care about that. I'm 51% in the game, so I've put in some hours, but I personally feel like so much of the game will bother you if you let it, where some people
Right.
want to get every gem in one playthrough. The first week the game is out, people are like, I can 100% the other games in an hour, but I can't do this one, and it's been a week. And it's like, well, it's a new game, and it's the modern era, but I will admit that even though I do defend a lot of the stuff in the sense that, like, hey, nobody's holding you at gunpoint to do this. You can play the game and beat it without doing any of these things. There's no extra level or anything for doing it. It's just a 30-second cutscene. With that said, I will agree it is padded artificially in some places.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to say that it's not. But at the same time, it's like, it's optional, but it's weird because Crash 4, without the padding of redoing some levels, like, it's already the longest Crash game. So it's like, didn't have to do it either. This is kind of just weird.
Yeah, and you made a good point where the box placement's different. It's a little bit harder than the original level, and I do appreciate that. And like I said, I don't have an issue with the inverted levels. It's a gimmick. Some of them
Right.
are fun. Some of them are not as fun. It's really an aesthetic. It's basically an Instagram filter over the level, and it's put in reverse.
Yeah.
But it's harmless. However, I think the side character stages having half of the original stage in it with just different boxes, I don't think is harmless, and I do think is irritating. It makes me not want to play those levels, whereas I would like to replay some Cortex or Dingodile levels, or even, I'm not crazy about the tunnel levels, but they're fun. I like them. I'm not going to say they're awful, even though I'm not
Right.
thrilled with the character
Right.
choices, but I don't play the games for character development in the first place. With
Right.
that said, I don't play those levels half the time, because if I'm going to play half the stage as Crash or Coco, I'm going to have more fun just playing it.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's weird. But to move on, the elemental masks, they are absolutely, I think, the heart and soul of this game. And all four of them are very fun, I would say.
I remember when I played the first level of the game, the first level or two, and I remember thinking, like, okay, this is fun, but let's be real. These kind of gimmicks almost never work in games. They're probably going to suck, and hopefully they won't hurt it too much. And then when you get the first quantum mask, and you basically phase objects in and out, so there's basically a binary system where, let's say there are two crates next to each other, and we'll say the A phase, there's the left box that's available, and you see the silhouette. It's like a 3D kind of silhouette where you see the outline of the right box, and then you hit either triangle or I believe R2, and then the left box will not be there, but the right box will. So you have to coordinate how you want to do it, and sometimes platforms are available or hidden depending on that. And I had so much fun immediately doing it, and it felt so natural to the gameplay. And that's how I felt every single mask, was that it was introduced and it just worked fluidly and just became a natural part of the game that I cherish. And I think is a highlight of the game. Like you said, it is the heart and soul of the game, which I can't believe I'm saying I was certain they would be the worst parts of the game.
Right. And I think it's the power up nature of them. It's they don't take over the gameplay. They just basically give you more movement options, more mobility, and allow you to go different places, which is really what you want out of a power up. That's what the fire flower does. It you kill enemies in your path. That's what the wisps and sonic colors can do. Is they unlock different pathways, but they're not really taking over the game either. And I would say the elemental masks, you're playing with one of those maybe 25% of the time the whole game. So it's not like they're constantly there, but when they are there, very thought space distortion, like the one you were describing, just a simple press of the trigger and making a platform appear before your feet when you land is very satisfying. So is like stopping time and jumping on platforms as well. And the last mask is inverting gravity, which again, you're still using all of Crash's momentum and its movement. You're just doing it upside down. You can switch that at will. Then the one mask that is really kind of more move based instead of like opening up areas to you is the dark mask, where you can do those triangle or the spins and then do a special helicopter jump in the air, which I was thought was really fun.
It was, and I really have to commend those dragon stages in the game. Not just aesthetically, but when you're floating around with the tornado spin, essentially,
Yeah,
it just feels huge, and you're going from platform to platform, and it really feels like it's just such a larger scope to the game. And once again, like you said, like I think the key is that each of these power-ups is simple. You just hit a button, and it's a simple change to the gameplay dynamic that switches it up and keeps you on your toes, and you get better with it as the game goes on. By the end of the game, you need to master each of these if you even want to finish the game.
yes, especially because of that last level in the gauntlet at the very end.
Yeah. Once essentially there's a fake out ending to the game, and then you realize, oh crap, I'm only maybe halfway, if not 2/3 of the way through the game, and there's a lot more to go. The game ups its intensity by like 25%, and then like 100% by the true last level, which
Right.
I appreciated a lot and was kind of flabbergasted. The first time I played Cortex Castle, which we're going to get to one way or another anyhow, so we may as well just open that can of worms. I think I died 45 times before getting it.
Yeah, I was probably somewhere around there as well, 40 or something. Um, yeah, there's that moment where you realize, oh, I have to run into all four of these different masks over and over again and use all of their abilities in tandem. And my God, it is exhilarating. I think it drove me a little mad earlier today. But once you get it down, I actually have to thank the Cortex level for making me play that part a second time, because the second time did not die 40 times. Like, I did it a lot quicker.
Yeah, a big thing I could say with these games, like I think because I have the less than 3 deaths trophy for that one, and I think it took me like one time I died 4 times, and it wasn't even all at the very end of the stage where you have to basically effortlessly go from mask to mask to mask without sparing a second. I just died kind of stupid shit at the beginning, and then I died a time or two at the end. And then the second time I did it, I got it the first try without dying once. And now it will take me 3 or 4 times to get through it all if I'm being cautious. But the game gets that much easier with each playthrough, and that's one thing I noticed. There's a knee-jerk reaction: the game's too hard, and now everybody's like great at it because we had to relearn how to play this new game. And I really appreciate that it wasn't just the game's made for people who played Crash for at least 20 years.
Right. No, it took some balls to do that. I think this game rode the line almost perfectly well between innovation, also paying respect to the older games. Because it's just weird when you think that, oh, the games were 96, 97, 98, and then 2020.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. I mean, we do have to acknowledge that there was probably a good 10, 15 games between these years. So it's really just the numbered games. And even in, I believe, Japan, the first PlayStation 2 release, Wrath of Cortex, was called Crash 4. So
Right.
it isn't as though the character has been out of the public conscience for that long, but quite frankly, it'd be better off if he was, considering some of those games.
Right. So it's we're talking about like quality games, then that number goes down a whole bunch, of course. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm really glad that we wanted to talk about these games, and the Crash games were on my list, on my backlog to experience, just so that I can, know what all the hype has been about. But apparently, I did it at the right time. I did it this year because then I was encouraged to get Crash 4 because of doing this podcast. So it all worked out really well.
Yeah. So do you just want to get into your overall thoughts on Crash 4, give it a rating, and then rank it with the rest of the series?
Yeah. Yeah, I would give Crash 4 like a 9.5 out of 10. I also would not give any of the original Crash 3 games like higher than an 8.5 or an 8 because I must say there are some things in the Crash games that are exceedingly unfair, like the depth of field and sometimes there's deaths where in the original trilogy just feel unfair. And I think Crash 4, most of the time I was dying, I felt like it was my fault. Like I felt like, oh come on, this is easy. Like I should know what I'm doing. But I think there's just been some enhanced sensibilities in design over the past couple decades. But I'm also a Nintendo snob, and I grew up on some of the greatest games like ever made. So the original trilogy, probably in the 8s out of 10 area. But man, Crash 4, absolutely my favorite in the series. It's not even a contest. Crash 4 is my favorite by a pretty wide margin.
A big thing for me is context with these games. So I would give Crash 4 probably a 9.5 or a 9, depending on my mood, compared to the others. With that said, judging Crash 1 as a game that came out at its point in time, with the games that were out at that point in time, as opposed to judging Crash 1 as opposed to Crash 4, if that makes sense.
Right.
Because of course Crash 4 is going to have certain features that the first just could not possibly, and with the remakes being as faithful as they were, they didn't really include. So on that end, I think aesthetically, I think gameplay, I think that with most things, the first 3 games were more innovative. I think that they were better in many ways. However, I think the 4th one is the smoothest for the most part with gameplay. I think it has some bullshit, some kind of glitches and stuff like that. I think the box placement, the padding, stuff like that really hurts it. I think sometimes the side quest, kind of side character levels get in the way and break up the pace in the way that the 3rd game has with the gimmick levels. Not as bad, but it does kind of hurt it for me. But speaking purely subjectively, though, take my critic hat off, the 4th game's my favorite. I can almost definitely say I thought that within like the first 5 levels of the game, which is kind of shocking after 20 years of having the first 3 as a gold standard. Almost immediately I connected with this game even more than those other ones. Maybe in another 20 years I won't say that, but I've been playing this game obsessively since it came out. I've probably beaten it 5 or 6 times, and it's just my favorite. Just going by pure taste, it's not the most perfect, I'll put it that way. I don't respect it like the others, but I enjoy playing it the most by far.
Yeah, I honestly respect it a lot because there has been a resurgence in the platformer genre in the second half of this console generation. And to bring Crash back for real and not just do remasters is a huge deal. There's just not many franchises that are doing that right now, other than say like Mario, that have always been around. Most of our other platformer itches are being scratched by indie games these days. To the fact that Crash is doing stuff again, and Ratchet and Clank is going to have a new game, and you know, the PlayStation 5 has launched with two 3D platformers in Astro's Playroom and Sackboy, his adventure game or whatever. Platformers are back, and it takes a lot of balls to bring a genre back that you don't know how people are going to respond to and buy anymore, because it really was the genre that was king in the 90s, and it's not anymore, but we're still making them. So just to keep that alive, my respect is through the roof. Thank you, Toys for Bob. You know what one of their first games was, Todd? It was Disney Skate Adventure, where you would skateboard as Toy Story, Lion King, and Tarzan characters. It was weird as shit, but it was part of my obscure GameCube childhood.
I actually did know that they made. I think they also made a Madagascar game adaptation and a weird skating game, and just
Right.
just by watching various internet critics, I've heard those strange history. They also did Skylanders, which I think is one of the most. I hear they're good games, but the character design is so horrendous and hideous that I will never forgive them for what they did to Spyro. Looking at this horrible deformed pug.
Spyro Reignited trilogy.
They did, and he looked pretty good in that one. That's a redemption story.
Really, just the whole story of the Toys for Bob studio is kind of like a wow. Look at what you can become over a couple of decades. Just like, now they're a studio name that's like actually on the map. So good for them.
I think what happened with Toys for Bob, and this is my personal opinion, is that I think they were hired as a third-party studio to breathe new life into games and put a different angle on them that maybe was forced, and try to bend these properties in directions that they just could not flex into. And I think finally with Crash 4, what we saw after Spyro the Dragon Reignited was they were given the opportunity to just make a Crash game as fans and not reinvent it in one way or another, but and they did reinvent it in some ways, but they were allowed to not change the essential spirit of the franchise.
Right. I mean, innovation is good, but you don't want to, nuke the identity of the series either. And I think they ride the line there really well.
Exactly. It's the perfect middle ground. So if you're content, I'm good to wrap up this review on the Crash quadrilogy.
Yeah, it's a really good quadrilogy. Now I've got more video game history under my belt. Thank you, Todd.
Anytime. I've been Todd Crawford.
I'm Eric Zavinski.
We are too cool for the comic shop.